Emily Perrin, welcome to the Soccer Queens podcast.
Thank you. So excited to be here. Excited to be back. Yeah, thanks for having me.
I can't wait. This will be a great topic today on all things therapy, mental health, and sports psychology. But before we get into the topics today, why don't you give the listeners your professional and sports background and who you are working with today?
Okay, so I'm a former Division One soccer player. I played at the University of Virginia, and then I got straight into coaching. I spent 3 years at the University of Pennsylvania as an assistant soccer coach before leaving coaching, and I always coached at the youth level as well. But went back to school, got my MSW, so Master's in Clinical Social Work. And really, over the last kind of 5, 6 years, I've kind of played two roles essentially. So I've had my business, Parent Wellness and Performance, really working mostly in sport, in the realm of kind of this new wave of what we're calling mental performance. I don't call myself a mental performance coach. We can talk about that. But really, my specialty is mindfulness. My background and I think my extended experience and knowledge and education is in mindfulness training, resiliency, the nervous system, the mind body connection. So I work as a mindfulness and performance coach with athletes, mostly college and professional. And then I am a therapist. I'm a licensed therapist. So I work in that realm in a clinical sense. I work in pretty intense trauma. So I work with people who are navigating, I mean, some of the most unimaginable things in life. So I kind of wear two hats, and then I'm also the director of the Medical Advisory Council at Morgan's Message, which is a pretty large nonprofit around athlete mental health. So I wear a lot of different hats, but the jobs and how I work with people is they're all very similar. They're all very intertwined. Is that did I get everything?
I think so. I feel like that was the shortened version, but that was
Yeah,
a really
maybe.
nice summary of your experience. And yes, Emily has a very big playing background, played at a high level. So she's been through the whole system. And now she is really working with a lot of athletes on their mental health and a lot of severe issues as well. And I want to clarify some definitions here because in the last few years, there's been this recent boom in the mental health space and online and different mental health coaching programs and then licensed therapists. And there's just so many options. And I think it would be good to start off with, okay, what is the difference between a mental health coach or mentor and a licensed therapist and the scope of practice within each?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think this conversation is so needed. I mean, you and I obviously we talk about this offline at length, but this really is it is a needed conversation for everyone. But because I think with awareness and knowing these different avenues and how, what professionals are doing, it then helps you make really educated decisions about who to seek help from. So let's start with a what we would call a licensed mental health professional. So that can be a lot of different things. So, for example, like I went the route of social work, right? Not every mental health therapist is a social worker or got a master's degree in social work. Some of them are psychologists, some of them are counselors. So, what does that mean? Under the realm of a licensed mental health professional, what this means is that you have a master's level or PhD level education in one of the following: psychology, counseling, or social work. So, clinical social work. Okay. That means that you have varying degrees of education that are at least a master's level. But then, right, you have to go through a licensing process. And what that means, and mental health licenses are mandated by the state. So just because, I have a license in the state of Maryland and the state of Pennsylvania, that means I cannot practice as a clinician outside of those two states. It's not possible. Okay. So that means we get our degrees, we get our education, and then we go through the specific licensing. So social work has a licensing, counseling has a licensing, psychology, they're all different licensings, right? And what that means is we sit for a board examination, and then we have to work towards thousands and thousands of hours of direct, indirect, and then supervision. Okay. So this is a very, it is very regulated. There are ethics. We are monitored by the board. All of this is regulated. Okay. Now, I want to be really clear in that, I have done this, right? I am still in my licensing process. It takes many people years, right? There's a reason for that because when you are working with mental health, when you're working with people, I think it is really important that you do know what you're doing and you do have experience. Now, what I will also say is that all of this education and the licensing process doesn't necessarily make someone a good therapist. I know plenty of people, plenty of athletes who have gone to someone that has a PhD and has been a therapist for 20 years, and they've had an immense amount of harm come from that therapeutic relationship. So I want to be really clear, and I am not saying that just because you go through all of this, you are qualified, right? And you're a good therapist, okay? Now, the kind of where we're moving is we've added this layer of the coaching realm, right? What does that mean? Well, coaching is, I don't even know, I'll be honest, because like I even call myself a mindfulness coach. What does that mean? Well, I know what that means. And to be fair, like it's a little bit unique and I've kind of created that for myself. Things you might hear: a mental performance coach, mental fitness coach. I have even heard mental health coach, which I'm not really sure what that means. Because technically, by law, you can't really be working in mental health, right? Diagnosing, helping people process, working with people therapeutically if you don't have a license. That's just the reality. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, good or bad, but legally that is how it is right now, right? So I don't really know what all of those things mean. I'm not going to sit here and say I know exactly what a mental performance coach is. I know exactly what a mental fitness coach is. I don't know. I think many people are kind of making it their own as they go through this, but generally there's a certification of some sort, right, from some type of governing body. The other thing I'll add is that therapists, licensed clinicians, we have to do what are called CEs, right? So continued education. We cannot hold our license and continue to hold our license unless we do annual CEs, right? So that is hours that we are hours of education, continued learning that we are paying for, right? That we are putting in the time and the energy in so that we're continuing to grow. From what I've seen, there is not that in the coaching world. So you can get a certification and then you just have that certification for life as a coach. Okay. The other thing around coaching is that from to my knowledge, there is no overarching governing body. There are no ethics. I think anyone can call themselves a coach and step into a coach and coaching role, right? And start working with things. Again, I want to be really clear. I am not saying by any means that these are equal. I'm also not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just simply stating the facts, right? Of what is out there. I also want to be really clear in that we do have to really acknowledge that higher education and getting a master's or PhD and doing the licensing, like it does cost money. It does take time, and not everyone can do that, right? And it's really important that we as a society, as a culture, like, I don't know how I feel about this. Like, well, you can only have conversations around mental health with a licensed professional. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I don't know if I'm necessarily aligned with that. Again, I think it is about having these conversations, creating awareness around what these roles are, what it means to be in this role. Because, really, I think what qualifies you to work with people in this type of capacity is a combination of all the above: your lived experience, your knowledge, your continued dedication to knowledge and learning, and also, your skill set, the skill set that you have as a human and a professional. Long-winded answer of saying they're very different, right? Coach and therapist. There's a lot more that goes into being a licensed professional. And I'm not necessarily saying one is better than the other, one is right or wrong. I'm just stating the facts.
So, in terms of the mental health coaching space, it would be more for athletes who want to just be equipped with like general tools on maybe like self esteem, confidence, overcoming adversity. Whereas a therapist would be more for maybe like severe and potential diagnosis of a mental health disorder. Because I think, like, when I look at the mental health coaching space online, I see in some people's bios who aren't licensed and who haven't gone through their education, their bio says that they are a trauma healer, or they're making these claims, oh, like, I help with anxiety and depression. I'm like, okay, well, maybe you are a good coach based on your experiences, but I don't know, I think sometimes with the more severe mental health disorders, there's a fine line on, okay, maybe, a licensed professional is a better bet. So maybe
Mhm.
you can get into, like, when to seek a therapist for
Sure.
something.
Yeah, I think that's a great, I mean, and one of the things I've seen quite frequently is like how we're distinguishing therapy versus coaching. And I've noticed, I don't know if you've seen this, like I've seen a lot of dialogue that like, oh, well, a therapist is like going to go into your past and psychoanalyze and talk about past stuff, and a coach is going to be all about the future. And I just think it's a terrible way to distinguish the two, because I'm a therapist and in my therapy role, I spend a lot of time talking about the future and a lot of time getting my clients to think about their future, right? And I do know that in that coaching role, there are conversations about the past, right? Because there have to be. We we as humans and as athletes and performers, we are shaped by our past. You can't just ignore that. So I think that's a terrible way to distinguish them. I'm not necessarily saying that like we have a perfect way to distinguish them, but I think that's not it. The general rule of thumb for me is like, okay, so there's some big overarching things around, okay, yeah, we need to think about a licensed mental health clinician. The other thing I'll say is that even when you get into the realm of licensed mental health clinicians, like we aren't all the same. We don't all specialize in the same thing. So here's a great example. And I often talk to my clients about it this way. Like if you had a torn ACL, would you go to a cardio surgeon and say, I need you to fix my ACL? God, no. That would be like the worst thing ever. That cardio surgeon would not know the ins and outs of fixing an ACL, right? Same thing here. Like if someone came, something that I don't really work in is eating disorders. So if I have a client that is really seeking help solely for eating disorders or disordered eating, like I'm going to look at that and say like, you know what? That's not really my area of expertise. I would rather, my job is to actually help you find someone that is going to help you with what you need. And that's not going to be me, because that I don't have extended training in that. I don't have a background in that, right? I mean, so I think that's really important for people to understand. The biggest one is going to be like if there is trauma, right? If there is, and trauma is a wide spectrum, right? So think things like acute trauma of like, okay, so if there is a death, a loss in your family or for someone, if there is some type of accident, if there is some type of natural disaster, if there is abuse occurring of any type, right? I'm going to say eating disorders, suicidal ideation, self harm, those things. Like that is like, for me, it's not a question. Like you need to be seeking someone that is not only a licensed therapist, but also has extended training and really specializes in what you are looking for, right? Or what you're looking for in your child. Because I know we're kind of framing this conversation for athletes, right? I think the other one is if, and this gets into this conversation around like what is normal and what's not normal. I think we have a society that really loves to pathologize things and tell people that, oh, well, if you're having a sad day, it's not good. And I just don't believe in that, right? Like we are as humans meant to have a wide range of emotions. I think we are moving in a time where we're a little too reliant on therapy. And the reason for that is because we need our athletes. We need people to be self-reliant. We need people to understand how to be with hard things and the wide range of the human experience and to self-regulate, right? So I think this kind of when things start to cross over and they are really pervasive and they are persistent and they are ongoing and they really do impede normal day-to-day life over some time, then it's time to think about that, right? And then I think the last thing is like one of the more nuanced and trickier things is like if you have a person or an athlete that is coming to you and saying like, I'm not okay, I don't feel safe, I don't feel safe in where I'm at right now, right? And so that's when it kind of crosses over into that potential suicidal ideation or self-harm, right? Like we don't get to question whether or not someone feels okay, right? And so what I say for a lot of my parents or families is like that, if your athlete is coming to you and saying I'm not okay, that we have to take that seriously, and we have to then use that as an invitation. Use that as an invitation to sit with them and explore and to ask more questions and to listen. That's not necessarily a, okay, well, let's just put you in therapy because that's going to fix everything. It's not. for the listeners out there, I'm just going to tell you right now, no one can fix you, not even a therapist, right? As a therapist, as a coach, I don't fix people because I can't, right? What I can do is I can be with them, I can create safe connection, I can help walk alongside of them as they gain insight and awareness and they gain a skill set, a tool set that allows them to really tap into their own fixing, right? So I think that is those are kind of the three main areas, right? So that kind of trauma piece, there's something that has really is really going on. There is that kind of pervasive, persistent, ongoing piece. And then there is this like invitation for more exploration if you have an athlete that's coming to you and saying, like, I'm really not okay.
That really helps to clarify it, and I find it so interesting that you open this can of worms that therapy is not for everyone, and in fact, it could actually have some dangers if people do therapy who don't necessarily need it, and as the example that you gave, just teenagers going through just everyday problems like school stressors, not
Mhm.
passing a test, being overwhelmed with homework, or having a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend. And I actually have known athletes in the past whose parents just got a therapist because they saw their kids so distraught during these times. And I understand as a parent, you hate seeing your kid sad and stressed out from high school drama and all that,
Yeah.
but why is it not good to always give a therapist as a solution? And why do our kids need to learn how to just navigate and, like you said, self regulate? I really like that term because it's like, what happens when they go off to college and they're on
Right.
their own and
Right.
therapist isn't there or mom isn't there and you have another breakup or you fail a class or you lose that college soccer game or you miss that PK in overtime. Like, what then? You're
Yeah.
not gonna have anyone there. So, I guess get into that more because there are dangers to any medical intervention.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's well, I mean, you know this better than anyone in your field as well. Like we live in a world where information is so accessible and we're also a society that's like we love like the next new thing, right? Like we love the next like almost like catchphrase or catch, medical intervention or catch like, look at kind of what's going on with like Ozempic, right? I mean, it's just like what is happening? I don't know. Like and what that does is it actually like it doesn't allow us what we're not building is a skill set for ourselves to look at information or to look at something and say "I- is that good and supportive for me, right? What is good and supportive for me, right? And so yes, there is a danger to anything. There's a danger to and I think we're moving in a wave where like there's a lot of people out there that would be like therapy's for everyone, everyone should go to therapy, and like okay, could everyone go to therapy? Sure. Does everyone have access to therapy? No. Does everyone need to be in therapy? Also no. I really don't think that. I think what's happening, right, is that we have become so reliant on therapy or medical professionals or just professionals in general that we're now taking away from, self-reliance, right? There's a great podcast. Her name is Dr. Caroline Leaf, and literally the title of the podcast is "Are We Too Reliant on Therapy?" And I would say yes, I think we are, because you're 100% right. And like this is someone that is, I'm very open about my own mental health journey. I have struggled with severe anxiety, I mean panic disorder, for years. And what I will tell you is that when it's 2 a.m. and you're going into panic, your therapist is not there, nor is your therapist going to pick up the phone. That's not their job, right? Nor should we really be feeding this kind of this cycle of the kid then texting a therapist, right? Or us needing, kind of thinking that the only way we're going to get through this moment is if I connect with my therapist. That is not doing anyone justice, right? What we need, and the point in therapy, right, is to be able to meet people where they are, build safe connection, and then help people really build and tap into a skill set, a tool set that allows them to be with whatever life presents, whether that's a panic attack at 2 a.m. or heartbreak 10 years from now, or the joy that comes with life, right? Like we need people to know how to what we call self regulate, right? Understand their emotions, understand what's happening physiologically in their body as emotions come up, and then have tools and skills to be able to actually navigate that. Now, here's the tricky thing, and this is where, I think you're going to have a lot to say on this as well. We need to really understand that our ability as general in general to self-regulate comes by way of what we call co-regulation. So we learn, and the reason for that is because when we come into the world, we're born as infants and we are totally dependent and reliable on other human beings. We literally can't survive. So this what we call kind of attunement, or this matching of caregiver and child, is really the foundation. It's the starting place of how we learn how to self-regulate. So here's what I'm going to propose. And I think this is a really, I think, especially because I work with a lot of high school athletes and I have high school clients in a clinical setting, like, we can't just be as family units and parents saying, and I want to preface this, I'm not a parent yet, right? But I think it's really important that we understand that your child's mental health, ability to navigate difficult things, self regulate, all the above, involves you as a parent. So if you are saying that, "Oh, okay, well, here's what I'm seeing in my kid, the solution is to just put them in therapy." And you're not also willing to look at self, and you're not also willing to look at the family unit and what's going on there, then nothing's really gonna change. That's just kind of how I think about it, right? So I think in that way we have become too reliant of, people just saying, "Oh, well, let's just find a therapist. Oh, well, let's just get you a therapist," right? That's not the sole answer. It can't be the sole answer. Does that make sense?
It 100% does, and I like what you said about how, as parents, we have to just allow our kids to have days where they do feel sad and they do feel stressed, and, like, that's okay. It's not, like,
Mhm,
good or bad, it just is, and
mhm,
that's life. Those are the volatile emotions that you go through as you are an athlete and a human on
mhm,
planet Earth, and I think that reliance on that therapist can get really dangerous because they're not always going to answer your
mhm,
text, and I know friends who try to text their therapist for every single problem, and I'm like, "This is definitely not their job," and I also know some people who have therapists who are, like, their best friend, and I wanted to ask your opinion on that because I know there's, like, a
mhm,
balance a therapist needs to play between, like, friend and calling something for what it is. But
mhm.
I think like the affirming someone's behavior therapy can be really dangerous. And I saw a quote the other day. It was just because a therapist is making someone feel good doesn't mean they're getting better. And I
Oh,
thought that was really interesting. So it's like, are we
oh,
going to therapy to feel good or to actually improve and be able to stop therapy and maybe go out into the world and be
yeah,
independent? So I really want to ask your opinion because I saw your post the other day about how your sessions are really hard and you don't look forward to them sometimes.
yeah. No, I don't. Oh my gosh. I mean, like, yeah. Oh my god, I love that quote, right? And I would say, yeah, we don't go to therapy to feel better. Life is not about just feeling better. Life is not about just being happy, because look at the world we live in right now. There's a lot of stuff that is going on in our world that I don't know a single person that would be happy about, right? So it's not about that. It is about, again, building your bandwidth to be with whatever life is going to present to you. And sometimes that is really, really hard stuff. It is really painful. There is grief and there is sadness. And we need to ultimately, again, build our capacity to be with those experiences and learn how to kind of, what I use this analogy, right? Of like dipping your toe in the water and then pulling it back out, dipping your toe in the water and pulling it back out with like really difficult, hard emotions. We need to teach our adolescents how to do that. And I think it's really, I mean, everyone needs to learn how to do that. But I know we're kind of talking about athletes in particular. But yeah, I would say I love that quote. I would agree with it. It is not one, um, therapists are not meant to be your friend ever. That for me, I mean, I come from social work, which social work I also have to say is not from the medical model, right? But that's an ethical thing. Like, we're not there to be your best friend. I would say even as a coach, I'm not friends with my clients, right? Like, that's not my role. my role is as a therapist, right, is to really create, and I think there is a difference between being a friend and creating safety. A therapist's main job is to create an environment, what we call a therapeutic relationship, that is built on the client's ability to access safety. Safety is a very embodied experience that where we feel grounded and we feel at ease and we feel like shame can be removed. Um, that is not, friend does not equal safe, right? So if I'm crossing into a role of trying to be your friend as a therapist, yeah, I have a real issue with that. That's not really supposed to be what therapy is about. So I would, for all the listeners, and if it's parents, if you feel like you're dabbling into a place where your therapist is your friend, I would question that. I would get curious about that, because that's not our role at all. And again, I don't think that you should be walking out of therapy every single time and going, "Oh my god, I feel so much better." Right? Again, life is not about just always feeling better and always feeling good. So that would be my take on that.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it gives people a better idea of how to vet a therapist because it is a process to find someone that you connect with who uses methods that works for your specific situation, and I had a therapist a few years ago when I moved down to Florida because I thought I needed some, like, relationship touch-ups before I got married to Casey, but I
Mhm.
remember our 3rd session, he was like, "Erica, you don't need to do this anymore. Like, I'm just gonna be completely honest, you're wasting your money. You do
Mm,
not need to be here. Like, I think you're doubting yourself that you can't handle certain things. Like, you are okay to go out there, and I think you're fine." And I thought that was really interesting for him to say that because I was paying out of pocket, and he
yeah,
easily could have been like, "Well, I'm just gonna keep taking her money. She pays on time.
yeah,
She doesn't have a severe mental health disorder, and I don't have to deal
mhm,
with that. Like, she's a chill patient."
yeah,
And I thought that was pretty amazing that he kind of fired me and was like, "Get out of here because you don't really need this. You are wasting your money." But I don't think that's the case for some therapists. They just keep saying, "Oh yeah, we'll take a 13-year-old girl who's just stressed about school and her parents have a disposable income and they'll pay on time and I'll get money." So like, I don't know. I just think like not everyone does that, but I just found it
sure.
interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's I mean, I always say, like, when I'm in that therapist, again, I really want to be clear, like, me as a coach and me as a therapist, like, they're different roles, right? I keep them
Right.
very separate. I do different work, but I think as a therapist, like, I always say, and I have a very open conversation from the get-go, is like, my goal is to get you to the place where you are not needing weekly therapy. You are not needing to come every single week. Now, again, I work in very intense trauma, right? So a lot of times when you're doing, and this is again very dependent on the population you're working with, the the challenges that you're working with, but like when you're working in trauma, like those tend to be much more long-term relationships, right? Because there's a lot of healing, there's a lot of processing, and you have to take that very, very slow. So there have been clients that I've been working with for 3 years, right? And we are not even close to being done with weekly therapy, right? And I also have clients where I've now shifted from, okay, once a week, once a week, once a week, to every other week, to now once a month, to, hey, let me know when you need me, right? That's the goal, because again, that gets back to this piece around, we want people to be self-reliant. We want people, I mean, here is what we forget, I think. The only person that lives with you 24/7 is you. You live in your own head and your own body 24/7. No one else does that. No one else is going to know you better than you know you. What we need people to get to, right, is being able to live with themselves 24/7, right? And be in their own heads and their own emotions and their own bodies and really have things come up, but then also have this sense of agency that, like, wow, yeah, I've done the healing, I've done the work, I have the tool set to be able to work through this, even though it's really hard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I had a question about I don't know how to put it. I guess like misdiagnosing or overdiagnosing a young kid. who is just going through regular stressors and saying you have anxiety or you
Mm,
have depression and it's very serious. It's like, okay, well, are we sure that's what's going on? Are we kind of forcing them to cling to a diagnosis and make that their identity and realize that they're stuck with it their whole life and they can't get out of it? Like that seems kind of scary to me as well. Just
mhm.
kind of throwing around these terms like you have anxiety, you have depression, and it's like, okay, let's like look into the matter here and see if this is actually a true diagnosis.
Yeah. Oh, great question. I mean, yeah, we're also moving at a time where like the conversation around mental health and also again the amount of information is like we've now moved into this wave of like self-diagnosing. So like something that I'm seeing quite a lot within adolescents and college age kids is like they're seeing information, right, of someone's story or a graphic or something, and then they're taking that and they're going, "Oh, yep, that's me. I've got this diagnosis." It's conflicting because again, we do have to understand that like, okay, there's some diagnosis, like let's take ADHD, right? To get an actual formal ADHD diagnosis, it takes time, it takes a lot of money, and no one like I can tell you right now, like I'm very privileged. I have a job, I have an income, I have health insurance. Like I couldn't pay to get diagnosed with ADHD, right? So we need to take that as like, okay, so there are pieces to this kind of like the overload of information that does make things more accessible. Like there is good to that, and I think it's about a balance. Do I want people going around and self-diagnosing? No. Reason being is I again think that we live in a society that loves to pathologize things. We love to put a label on things. We love to diagnose. And I just posted a reel the other day that was like half the stuff, this is my opinion, half the stuff that I think we are diagnosing as I don't even use the term mental illness. I don't use it anymore. Half the stuff we're calling mental illness or we're giving a diagnosis to, or we're saying, maladaptive coping skills actually just make a lot of sense when you sit down and you talk to someone and you talk about their lived experience and the stuff that they've been through and how they're trying to make meaning of that. Why do we need to call that a disorder? Why do we need to call that an illness? I just that now there are pieces to diagnosing using the DSM that have been life changing for people, right? That have it saves lives. There is a need for that, and I also think it's really important to understand that like one, the only reason that we really have a DSM and diagnose is one of two things, right? Insurance. We have to be able to bill as therapists. We have to be able to type in a code in order to bill an insurance company. And two, research, right? So this whole like diagnosis medical model, it's just really been driven by like higher education, right? And I have a lot of mixed feelings about that, right? Because again, I think then what it ends up doing more often than not is creating more shame, creating more blame, creating more guilt. Like I'm wrong, something's wrong with me. And the reality is no, actually 99.9% of the time there's nothing wrong with you. You are human and you've been through X, Y, and Z, and your lived experience has really impacted you, and you've been trying to cope, and that's human, right? So getting back to your piece around like, are we too quick to diagnose? I may get a lot of heat from this. Yeah, I think we are at times. I have a mentor who I love in the like trauma space, and like she does not use mental illness. She does not use symptoms. She doesn't even use the word symptom, right? She does not, and one of the conversations around diagnosing is like that we have I think run into a lot of issues around is borderline personality disorder. She's like, I don't ever use it. She's like, I haven't used it in 15 years to diagnose a client. Because if you look at and you strip away all of this criteria, I don't even know where my DSM is. Like, if you go through and you look at all of the criteria, right, that diagnoses and labels someone as borderline, literally to a T, it's someone that has been through an immense amount of trauma. they're not borderline. They've been through a lot in their life, and how they are trying to show up and make meaning and live life and make sense of the world makes a ton of sense, right? And yet, having borderline personality disorder as a diagnosis can be extremely detrimental. I mean, there are many therapists I know in a clinical setting that, like, you say borderline and you're like, "Yep, I don't want to work with that client." That, and so again, and at the same time, there's also been a lot of people that have gotten that diagnosis and feel an immense amount of relief, and it helps them. So I think it's a catch-22. I think, yes, I would say my take is I think we are really quick to label and to use terms like a diagnosis, when really, and again, a diagnosis is, we use an assessment. There is criteria that you have to meet. It's not just, oh, I get a little anxious here and there. Like, no, we have to take you through the assessments, and it has to be scaled, and there's a number and all that jazz, right? So again, I just think that, it's yeah, we're just operating in a world where, yeah, we love to label things, we love to diagnose. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it's very driven by kind of this medical model that, more often than not, it says, well, what's wrong with you? Let's find what's wrong with you, rather than say, what's happened to you, and how have you learned to cope, and how can we meet you where you are, and help you, right? And support you, and actually help you figure out what's already going right in your life, right? And build on that and make subtle changes, 1% here and there, that help you step into a more fulfilling and joyful life.
I love that because it brings back that empowerment to the athlete or to the patient, and
Yeah.
they feel like it's not their diagnosis that is their identity,
Yeah.
but they're able to overcome it and find solutions and gain that confidence
Yeah.
within themselves. So I really like that. And also with the ADHD thing, I couldn't agree more. I think ADHD is one of those ones where it is overdiagnosed to young children who just naturally want to bop around and be stimulated and be moving. And I actually just read a book by Dr. Carla Hannaford, I think it's called Smart Moves, and it's about how kids shouldn't always be sitting still for
Oh,
6 to
yeah.
7 hours a day in school. It's
Yeah.
it's no wonder that they struggle to learn and to focus. They need to get some
Totally.
exercise throughout the day because movement is something that's needed for the brain to learn and retain
Hmm.
information and get the blood flowing. So I think the ADHD diagnosis is it's a very tough one, and I didn't know that it was so hard to go through the testing to actually get the diagnosis. So
Hmm.
I guess people are just kind of giving it out, you know?
Yeah, I mean, to actually get the kind of, like, the formal, right, to go through all the testing and get the formal diagnosis, like, it's a lot. It's not easy. Again, not everyone has access to it. There is a very biological piece to ADHD. I don't want to overlook that. And again, like there are a lot of people in the world who actually have ADHD, right? And that's an executive functioning thing. We're not making that up, right? And you're right. Our education system is not conducive to learning, to develop mental, good developmental growth. It's just not, right? No one in their right mind should, in my opinion, right, at 5 years old, should be going and sitting at a desk. Maybe the government's going to come for me, but like, I just don't think that is. You're exactly right, right? Like, kids are supposed to be bopping around and really expressive, and they're constantly making meaning of the world, right? And to then put them in a desk, right, and start doing testing and all that stuff, I'm not a fan of it, right? But it is what it is. So
Now, my last question is about just the social media space. So,
yeah.
this is a big paradox going on, and I'm really curious what your thoughts are. But now in 2024, it seems like there is just endless information on mental health. We do have a lot of resources. We have online therapy through platforms like BetterHelp. We have TikTok mental health advocates and influencers, but mental health isn't getting much better in people, might be getting worse. So, what's going on with that and how do we navigate this and come out of it?
Yeah. Spot on, right? So I think the one thing we have to really remember, right, is that, like, just because we see more, and let's start in just kind of like the athlete realm, right? Just because we see more professional athletes and big time athletes coming out and talking about their mental health does not mean that that then translates to organizational change, systemic change, financial change, right? In organizations, in personnel, right? It doesn't mean anything in my opinion. It means something in terms of helping people know they're not alone, creating more connection, breaking down the stigma 100%. But none of that actually then translates to the NCAA doing more, to college campuses and athletic departments actually, putting money where their mouths are, right? In terms of mental health. So I just want to be really clear about that. I think that's really important, right? I think there's some big things in terms of helping people, but specifically our young people have more awareness around what they are looking at, what they are reading, what they are taking in on social media. So when it comes to mental health, there was a fantastic article. His name is Dr. Scott Lyons. He's fantastic. He was a part of this article, and it was really kind of talking about this like TikTok influencer piece around mental health. And one of the comments he made that really stuck out to me and I really resonated with was like, just because someone is sharing their personal story, their personal take, doesn't mean that that is then something that you have to take as truth or truth for you. Does that make sense? Like that's their share, right? That's their journey, their story. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, right, like we share or people put out there, right, their pieces of their journey, which again I think is really needed and it's helpful, but then what happens is people go, oh well, that's just how it is, right? That's how anxiety works, or that's how shame works, or that's how eating disorders work. And I'm like, no, actually all of this is very nuanced, very individual, and very unique. They're sharing their journey, they're sharing their story. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of the above translates to you in any way, shape, or form. So I think it's just helping people kind of like take a step back at times and say, oh, wow, like that's a really powerful share. Like, I'm a huge fan of having, especially my teens, like come to social media from a place of curiosity and exploration rather than truth and fact. So, what I'm a huge fan of is if somebody reads something. I had a client that did this the other day and I loved it. They read something about, sure enough, borderline personality disorder. They said, hey, I saw something. I wanted to bring it to our session and like I'd like to just talk about how this made me feel. And I would like to explore this with you. Fantastic. Great. I love that, right? Because now we're creating a dialogue that then, as a therapist, right, I can help them step into their curiosity, their feelings, their insight, their awareness, and also provide my own professional advice, right? Expertise. Rather than saying, right, or having a client read something about, again, anxiety, borderline, whatever, and say, oh my God, I've got borderline. No, 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 you don't, right? Let's take a step back, right? So there's a huge difference. So really coming to the lens of or the world of social media, TikTok, all the above around mental health from a place of curiosity and exploration. And really then moving to, if they see something, right? And we all know how social media is. Like the feed is constantly like, I mean, especially if you're on reels, like that thing, they go quickly, right? They're moving through. So if you see something that kind of like piques your interest, or you're like, oh, then what I invite people to do is like, well, you need to check that person out. Who is that person? What is their, like, if you're looking at their profile, like what is their expertise? What is their professional background? What is their education? What have they done in this space? And then also, okay, great, it's also cool to look at their lived experience, right? But just taking one bit of, a 7-second reel and going, oh my God, I resonate with that, that's my truth, this is my life now. No, we don't want to be doing that, right? We need more awareness, right? We need more discernment, okay? So I think that's and then really just kind of also remembering that so much of the social media world is highlights, right? And it is giving you the 1% of the story. I saw something the other day that was like, oh, well, the solution to all things mental health is walking. And I go, geez, that's a really bold claim, bold statement, right? Like that's not inclusive. That's giving you 1%, right? I mean, the other thing that I look at that, I'm like, well, not everyone can walk. So like, what do you want to do for the hundreds of thousands of people that are in a wheelchair or that are paralyzed or that are dealing with chronic pain, right? So you're telling them, you're now giving them the message that, okay, well, health, wellness, mental health, all off the table for you because you can't walk. Like discernment. We have to have discernment. We have to teach our kids to, sure, scroll, look at the information because this is the world we live in, but also push the pause button, take a step back, do your homework, look at the information, and then remember that it's the 1%. Right. And if you're gonna, if something does spark your interest, then take it back to a parent, to a loved one, to your therapist, your coach, and say, hey, can we have a conversation about this? Coming from that place of curiosity and exploration.
I love that. It can be just so much, like, it's just overwhelming. Do you think there's also a value in maybe just unfollowing certain accounts and taking a step back from not consuming anything?
Oh yeah. I'm a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
I think also this last piece that we're not, we also need to layer in for all people, but adolescents in particular is like, well, how is the information making you feel? Because I can tell you right now, I do not follow and I unfollow people that evoke a feeling of shame, evoke a feeling of I'm not worthy, evoke a feeling of and again, that's not to me, that's not me avoiding that feeling. That's me recognizing, oh, there's something deeper here, right? That is coming up for me. So I need to bring that to my therapist or I need to do some time with that. But I also don't need to keep perpetuating the cycle here, right? So I think that in a way is being self-reliant. It is learning to self-regulate and to draw boundaries. I think that's totally okay.
Yeah, I think less social media can be very, very beneficial for many people.
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, like there's also so much research going coming out every single day about just like the harm that social
Mhm.
media in particular is doing, especially on our adolescent kids. The reason being, our the adolescent brain is not fully formed, right? Our prefrontal cortex, so this area that allows us to have logic and reasoning and insight, it doesn't fully form until your 20s. So our adolescents, their brain is being shaped for better or for worse by social media. So I think we all need to really understand that. Parents in particular need to understand that. And I think the more boundaries and limitations and rules around social media for adolescents, the better. I do. I really believe that.
Yeah. Well, Emily, this has been such a great conversation and just so much for everyone to think about and just hear a new perspective on. But I think it really did clarify what a therapist does, what a mental health coach does, and
Mhm.
do you need either? And what are
Yeah.
some situations where you would need to hire both? So, where can everyone find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty accessible. Social media, Emily Perrin, LMSW. That'll be all my stuff. I have a YouTube channel. Just type in my name, Emily Perrin, Twitter. My website is, I always forget my website, perrinwellnessandperformance.com, I think it is.
I'll
Pretty
put
much,
it in the notes.
yeah, if you find me on social media, you'll find everything else.
All right, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this episode with Emily, and I will see you next time.